Chapter 1. The 10 a.m. Interview. My 5-year plan involves streamlining multi-divisional asset management to maximize ROI, implementing a Six Sigma approach to logistical efficiency, and scaling our core competencies to... Elara Vance's mouth kept moving, but her brain had hit a buffer. The words were a perfectly rehearsed, meaningless buzz, lost to the screech of the subway brakes and the smell of someone's chili dog breakfast. She squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white on the steel pole. This was it. The 10 a.m. interview. Her portfolio, a sleek black leather binder she'd spent her last $50 on, was tucked under an arm that was rapidly losing feeling. Inside was her masterpiece, a resume polished to a mirror shine, a 30-page analytical report on the Costanzo Group's theoretical market position. She'd had to guess. Their public footprint was non-existent, and a color-coded Gantt chart for her first 90 days. She was, by nature, a professional fixer. She fixed broken workflows, dysfunctional teams, and catastrophic budget deficits. She lived for the clean lines of a solved problem. But she couldn't fix this. She couldn't fix the $184,312.47 in medical debt that had devoured her father's life, and was now gleefully chewing through hers. She couldn't fix the final notice letter on her kitchen counter, or the fact that her only suit, a sharp charcoal gray, was just a little too tight in the shoulders, a subtle, constant reminder of the gym membership she'd canceled 6 months ago. The job ad had been a ghost, posted on a high-level executive board for less than an hour. Executive Assistant Costanzo Group. The responsibilities were vague. Complex scheduling, discrete asset management, high-level logistical support. The salary, however, was a goddamn life raft. It wasn't just a number, it was a resurrection. It was the ability to breathe, to sleep, to stop the endless, suffocating panic. The subway doors opened. Elara was propelled onto the platform by the human tide, her focus absolute. She checked her watch. 9:42 a.m. Perfect. The Costanzo Group's headquarters was not a building. It was a threat. A 90-story monolith of black glass and steel that stabbed the downtown skyline. It was designed to make you feel small, and it was doing a spectacular job. The lobby was a cathedral of silence, all marble and shadow. There was no receptionist, just a slab of a desk manned by a mountain in a suit. His nose was a roadmap of past mistakes, and his eyes were as warm as a dead fish. Elara Vance. I have a 10 a.m. interview for the executive assistant position, she said, her voice sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. The mountain didn't speak. He just grunted and tapped a massive finger on a security panel. A single elevator, hidden in a dark alcove, chimed. Penthouse, he grumbled. The ride up was silent, smooth, and terrifying. It was the kind of elevator that moved so fast it felt like a controlled plummet. Elara rehearsed her opening. Mr. Costanzo, thank you for this opportunity. I'm confident my proactive management style will be an invaluable asset to your team. The chime was soft, but it made her jump. The doors slid open, and Elara's meticulously organized brain shattered. This was not an office. This was a war room. The elevator opened directly into a vast penthouse boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a bleeding-edge view of the city. But the glamour stopped there. The air was thick with cigar smoke, and a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. 12 men, that was her first thought. 12 of the most terrifying, lethal-looking men she had ever seen, all seated around a massive, obsidian-black table. They were dressed in suits that cost more than her car, but there was nothing corporate about them. They looked like predators. Like sharks that had learned to walk, talk, and tie a Windsor knot. A hot-headed man with a cruel, handsome face and a snake smirk, he was the first to notice her. He nudged the man next to him. One by one, 12 sets of dead-cold eyes swiveled to the elevator. To her. Elara's blood turned to ice water. Did I get the floor wrong? Is this a hostile takeover? A final, bizarre stress test? At the head of the table, silhouetted against the glaring sky, sat the 13th man. He was the center of gravity. The silence didn't just surround him, it emanated from him. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 34, and lethally handsome. His black suit was a masterpiece of tailoring. His dark hair was cut with severe precision, and a faint, silvery scar cut from his left temple to the sharp line of his jaw. He radiated a cold, absolute control that was more frightening than all the others combined. His eyes, dark and unreadable, pinned her to the spot. This had to be him. Dante Costanzo. The handsome snake charmer let out a low chuckle. Well, well. Looks like someone sent the entertainment early. Elara's flight instinct screamed. It shrieked. Get in the elevator. Press the button. Leave. Leave now. But the debt. The $184,312.47. The eviction. Her terror. Meet her desperation. Desperation won. Bolstered by a wave of pure, pants-wetting adrenaline, Elara Vance did the only thing her corporate-programmed brain knew how to do. She clutched her leather portfolio, took one, stuttering step into the room, and cleared her throat. Mr. Costanzo? Her voice was a pathetic squeak. She tried again, aiming for assertive. It came out, strangled. Mr. Costanzo? My name is Elara Vance. I have a 10 a.m. interview for the executive assistant position. I apologize if I'm interrupting. The silence that followed was absolute. The man with the snake smirk, she would later learn this was Marco Rinaldi, looked at Dante like he was insane for not having her shot on the spot. An older, pale-eyed man with a thick Eastern European accent, Victor Petrov, looked at her with the bored curiosity of a scientist studying a new, idiotic insect. Dante Costanzo didn't move. He just watched her, his head tilted slightly, a flicker of something in those bottomless eyes. It wasn't amusement, it was intrigue. This woman, in her slightly too small blazer, reeking of terror and cheap green apple shampoo, had just walked into a summit with the Bratva and brought a resume. The silence stretched for 10, 20, 30 seconds. Elara was convinced her heart had stopped. Finally, Dante Costanzo spoke. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that sent an entirely inappropriate shiver down her spine. You're late, he said. Elara blinked. I'm sorry. My watch said 9:58. He ignored her, gesturing with one long-fingered hand to the single empty chair at the table. It was, of course, in the worst possible place. Directly to his right, nestled between him and the pale-eyed Russian, who was already staring at her, as if imagining how her skin would look as a lampshade. Sit, Dante commanded. Stunned, numb, and moving on pure automated terror, Elara Vance walked the gauntlet. Her heels, the sensible 2-inch pumps the internet had assured her were professional, clicked like gunshots on the marble floor. She could feel every eye on her, a physical, violating pressure. She slid into the heavy leather chair, her portfolio held against her chest like a shield. The chair was cold, or maybe she was. She could smell him. He smelled like ozone, expensive wool, and something dark and clean like vetiver. Dante Costanzo turned his body, just slightly, to face her. The entire monstrous table turned with him. He was ignoring a dozen killers to focus, with the intensity of a laser on her. He slid her portfolio from her unresisting fingers, opened it, and glanced at her Gantt chart. A muscle in his jaw ticked. He looked up, his dark eyes locking with hers. The shock wasn't that he was angry. It was that he wasn't. He looked intrigued. All right, Ms. Vance, Dante Costanzo said, his voice a deadly purr. Let's see your 5-year plan. Chapter 2. Strengths, Weaknesses, and Hostile Takeovers. Elara's brain did a hard reboot. The room, the men, the suffocating tension, it all momentarily dissolved, replaced by the familiar, adrenaline-fueled focus of a high-stakes interview. This was her arena. She might not understand the players, but she knew the game. Or so she thought. My 5-year plan, she began, her voice gaining a fraction of its usual confidence, is to integrate myself as a key asset to your executive team. In year 1, I'll focus on optimizing your current operational workflows. By year 3, I aim to have implemented a predictive logistical model. By year 5... Let's stop there, Dante interrupted, his voice cutting through her rehearsed speech. He hadn't looked at the other men once. He was still studying her resume, his thumb smoothing over the 80-pound cardstock she'd agonized over. The simple, possessive gesture sent a jolt of heat straight to her core. It says here your specialty is logistics for sensitive assets. He looked up, his eyes boring into hers. My company is currently navigating a period of rapid, aggressive expansion. We acquire new assets weekly. How do you handle the logistics for sensitive assets? The pale-eyed Russian, Viktor Petrov, let out a soft, humorless huff. The man named Marco openly smirked. Elara's mind raced. Sensitive assets. Okay. He means proprietary data, high-value corporate acquisitions, maybe bearer bonds. My focus is always on efficiency and discretion, Mr. Costanzo, she said, falling back on her training. I'd first establish a clear chain of custody. Every asset, from acquisition to final placement, needs a clear audit trail. I would implement a new tracking system. Real-time data is key to preventing shrinkage. Petrov, who had been sipping water, actually choked. He turned it into a gravelly cough, his pale eyes watering. Marco looked at Dante like he had grown a second head. Elara froze. Shrinkage? Was that the wrong term? Did they call it loss mitigation here? Dante, however, just nodded slowly. His expression was completely, terrifyingly blank. Shrinkage is a significant concern, he agreed, the words rolling off his tongue with a dark, velvety texture. And your methodology for this audit trail? I'd create a new intake protocol, Elara said, warming to her topic. This, she understood, a single point of entry. Too many receiving points create vulnerabilities. You centralize, you secure, you tag. Everything and everyone gets processed through one gate. It's the only way to ensure 100% accountability. One gate, Dante repeated, his voice thoughtful. He tapped his finger on the table. I like that. Accountability. He leaned in. The other 12 men leaned in with him, a predatory wave of expensive wool and quiet menace. Elara fought the urge to shrink back. His proximity was overwhelming. That clean, sharp scent of vetiver mixed with the faint, metallic tang of adrenaline. His or hers? The Costanzo group values loyalty, Ms. Vance, but we often have personnel conflicts, aggressive personalities vying for the same territory. How do you handle structural reorganization to remove friction points? She was suffocating on the double meanings. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her interview mode was a stubborn, well-built fortress. Friction points are just inefficiencies, she stated, trying to sound braver than she felt. I believe in clear, direct communication. Define the roles, define the territories. If the personalities are still incompatible, you look at the structure. Sometimes, to save the larger organism, you have to remove the conflicting part. Redundancies are a drain on resources. You identify them and you cut them loose. A heavy, appreciative silence fell. Marco's smirk was gone, replaced by a new, calculating expression. Petrov was watching her with undisguised fascination. "You cut them loose," Dante mused. He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning softly. "And your biggest weakness?" Elara had practiced this. "I can be overly meticulous, Mr. Costanzo. I don't like loose ends. I believe every problem has a structured solution, and I can become frustrated when others don't follow the workflow. I don't believe in good enough. I believe in finished." "No loose ends," Dante said, almost to himself. He stared at her, not as an employer, but as something else. As if he was a man dying of thirst and she was the first drop of rain he'd seen in a decade. It was intense. It was unnerving. It was deep in the most primal, idiotic part of her brain, unbelievably hot. She could feel the heat of his gaze on her mouth, on her throat, on the pulse fluttering at the base of her neck. He was, she realized, trying to decide what to do with her. The thought should have been terrifying. It was. But it was also electric. Dante Costanzo closed her portfolio. The sound was a final, deafening thud in the silence. He looked, not at her, but at Victor Petrov. "Our business is concluded for the day, Victor. I believe my new associate has given you a clear picture of our new operational strategy." Petrov's pale eyes narrowed. He slowly rose, a giant of a man, and dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "An unusual choice in personnel, Costanzo. Very modern. But a pretty new spreadsheet cannot fix a foundation that is rotten." He gave Elara one last, chilling look that stripped her bare, then turned and walked to a private elevator, his men falling in line behind him. One by one, the other men filed out. Marco was the last. He paused by Elara, his eyes raking over her with a possessive, greasy familiarity. "Welcome to the team, honey," he purred. "That's Ms. Vance," Dante said, his voice quiet, but laced with surgical steel. Marco's face tightened. He gave Dante a look that was anything but loyal, then turned and left. The door hissed shut. They were alone. The room was suddenly, impossibly larger. The silence was different now, no longer heavy but thin and brittle, charged with an energy that made the hair on Elara's arms stand up. Elara, buzzing with a cocktail of adrenaline and terror, finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She thought, ridiculously, that she'd nailed it. "So," she said, her voice trembling with the come-down, "Mr. Costanzo, do I get the job?" Dante stood. He didn't pace. He moved, a fluid predator's grace, to the massive window, his back to her. He clasped his hands behind him, staring down at the city he so clearly owned. "The executive assistant position you applied for doesn't exist," he said, his voice flat. Elara's world tilted. The blood rushed from her head, leaving a cold, sick void. The debt, the eviction, the $184,312.47. She felt lightheaded, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. She had just auditioned her Gantt chart for the fucking Mafia for a job that wasn't real. "Oh," she whispered. Her hands, resting on the table, were shaking violently. I see. I'll just see myself out then." She made to stand, but his voice stopped her. "It was a decoy," he said, still facing the window. "A ghost listing on a private board, traceable. I was hunting for a leak in my organization, for a traitor who is feeding information to men like Victor Petrov." He turned. His eyes were black, intense and utterly unblinking. The man who applied, or rather, the man who tried to get his own applicant into that position, was Marco Rinaldi? Elara's mind was blank. She couldn't process. What? You, Ms. Vance, were a variable I did not account for. You, with your Gantt charts, and your absolute terrifying sincerity. He walked back to the table, stopping just inches from her. So close she. You are the only person who has walked into this room in 5 years who isn't a liar. You are organized. You are meticulous. And you do not like loose ends. Her heart was doing a drum solo against her ribs. The job you applied for is fake, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. However, I find myself in need of a personal project manager. The salary in the ad? I'm doubling it. Elara's mouth went dry. Double? Your first project, he said, is the man who just left. The one who called you honey. He reached over and tapped a thick black file that was sitting on the desk. She hadn't even noticed it. The name on the tab was stark white. Rinaldi M. My organization has a pest problem, Ms. Vance, and I don't like shrinkage. He was too close. His power, his scent, his cold, dangerous intelligence. It was a cage, and the bars were snapping shut. You, Dante Costanzo said, are my new exterminator. You're going to help me find a traitor. Chapter 3. The Gilded Cage and the First Deliverable. Elara's brain, which had successfully rebooted in the boardroom, promptly crashed again. Blue screen of death. Exterminator, she repeated, the word tasting like ash. Mr. Costanzo, I think there's been a profound, and I mean profound, misunderstanding. My expertise is in pivot tables and workflow optimization. The only thing I've ever exterminated is a spider plant I forgot to water. You can't. No. She fumbled for her portfolio, which he still had. I'll just go. I won't say anything. I'm excellent at discretion. It's on my resume. She tried to step around him. In one fluid, devastatingly silent movement, he blocked her path. He didn't touch her, but he didn't have to. He was a wall of muscle and menace, and the air around him was 10 degrees colder. You saw their faces, Ms. Vance, he said, his voice no longer intrigued or purring. It was flat, final. You saw Victor Petrov. You saw Marco Rinaldi. You saw the heads of the 5 families. You sat at my table and you breathed my air. You don't just go. The reality of her situation slammed into her, a physical, crushing weight. This wasn't a job offer. It was a conscription. I'm a prisoner? The words came out in a terrified whisper. You're an asset, he corrected, his dark eyes unblinking. And I protect my assets, which means you are, as of this moment, under my protection. You will not be leaving this building, not alone. Her old life, her tiny, debt-ridden apartment, her dying plants, her $2 instant coffee vanished, evaporated. She was a ghost now, haunting a billionaire's penthouse. You can't do this, she said, her voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of defiance and horror. I can, he replied simply. And I have. He gestured for her to follow him. Numb, legs shaking, Elara did. He led her out of the boardroom, through a massive, minimalist living space that looked more like an art gallery than a home, and down a long, white corridor. He stopped at a set of double doors and pushed them open. It wasn't a guest room, it was an apartment within an apartment. A palatial cream and gold suite with its own living room, a fireplace, a king-sized bed that looked big enough to sleep a family of 6, and a wall of glass overlooking the park. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. It was a cage, a gilded, impossibly luxurious cage. Her ridiculous portfolio was still in his hand. He tossed it onto a silk chaise lounge. My head of security, Leo, will be by shortly to finalize your onboarding. He'll get you a new phone, a new laptop. Anything you need, you ask him. Anything. Onboarding, Elara repeated, the corporate speak sounding utterly profane in this new context. She spun on him, her sarcasm her only shield, her only weapon. So just to clarify my benefits package, Mr. Costanzo, does this include dental, or am I just in the hostage pay grade? He was on her in a second. He moved with a speed that was almost unnatural, crowding her back against the cool, paneled wall. His body was a furnace, radiating heat, and he was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark, furious eyes. One hand came up to brace the wall by her head, caging her completely. "You're in the I own you now pay grade, Ms. Vance," he growled, his voice a low vibration that she felt in her teeth. "You are not a hostage. You are mine, and you will do exactly as I say." The sheer, arrogant possession in his voice should have terrified her. It did. But it also sent a bolt of white-hot, traitorous heat straight to her core. Her body was reacting before her brain could, a primal, stupid animal recognizing its new master. She hated it. She hated him. "And if I refuse?" she challenged, her voice breathy. "Then you're no longer my asset. You're a loose end." He let the words hang in the air, the echo of her own weakness from the interview. "And you told me yourself what you do with loose ends. You cut them loose." The threat was clear. He would kill her. Or worse, he'd let Petrov or Marco find her. "My family," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a cold dread. My apartment." "Leo is retrieving your essentials as we speak," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, as if he sensed her surrender. He hadn't moved an inch. "As for your family, that medical debt, the $184,312.47, the pending eviction from your father's home." Elara's blood ran cold. How did you—" "I'm a meticulous man myself, Ms. Vance. I ran your background check while you were in the elevator." The cold, ruthless efficiency of it was staggering. "Don't," she pleaded, a single hot tear of rage and shame tracing a path down her cheek. Don't hurt them. Please." His expression changed. The coldness was still there, but it was joined by that same, unnerving flicker of fascination from the boardroom. He hadn't expected her to beg. At least, not for someone else. "It's gone," he said quietly. She blinked, the tear hanging on her jaw. "What?" "The debt." "I bought it. It's paid. Your family's home is their own. They will never hear from a creditor again." Elara's legs gave out. She would have crumpled to the floor if he hadn't been caging her against the wall. He had just erased. He had erased the single biggest, most terrifying problem in her entire life with a casual wave of his hand. He had done it in the time it took her to ride an elevator. The emotional whiplash was violent. She didn't know whether to thank him or stab him. He had just solved her life's purpose, and in doing so, had stolen her life completely. You! He watched her, his gaze intense, analytical. He was studying her, cataloging her reaction. He reached out, not with his hand, but with a single long finger, and brushed the tear from her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of static and fire that made her gasp. "You see, Elara," he murmured, his voice a possessive, intimate purr. "I protect what's mine. And you are mine." He pushed off the wall, leaving her cold and trembling, and walked to the door. "The Rinaldi file is on the desk in your new office," he said, gesturing to a room off the suite. "It contains the ledgers for his 3 legitimate businesses, a shipping company, a linen supplier, and a string of restaurants. I know he's skimming. I know he's moving money to Petrov. But he's using old-world codes, and my men are soldiers, not accountants." He paused, his hand on the door. "I need you to find it. I need your Gantt charts, your pivot tables, Your workflows. I need you to be the meticulous, obsessive project manager you are. Find my traitor." The door clicked shut, leaving Elara alone in her magnificent, beautiful prison. For a full hour, she was paralyzed. She alternated between hysterical sobbing and a blind, cold panic. She tried the door. Locked. She tried the windows. They were, of course, sealed. Finally, the adrenaline wore off, and the one, true constant of her personality took over. The burning, obsessive need to fix the problem. She couldn't escape. Not yet, but she could work. She stormed into the new, state-of-the-art office. The Rinaldi file was there, a 3-inch thick stack of pure, fraudulent paper. A new top-of-the-line laptop was humming on the desk. "All right, you son of a bitch," she muttered, not sure if she meant Dante or Marco. "You want a fucking audit? I'll give you an audit that will make you weep." She dove in. She worked for hours, fueled by a terrifying, cold rage and a pot of coffee delivered by a silent, unsmiling guard. The sun set, and the city lights came on, a diamond spray across her window, but she didn't see them. She saw only the numbers, and the numbers were sloppy. Marco was arrogant. He was hiding his transfers, but he was doing it with old-school, lazy accounting. He was moving tiny, random-seeming amounts, $34.12, $102.50, $8.99, from the linen company's supply budget into the shipping company's fuel overage column, then consolidating them and shipping them out to a single ghost account. It was a classic, disorganized shell game. She cross-referenced. She built a spreadsheet. She color-coded. Her fingers flew. She found it at 3:47 a.m., the ghost account. A holding company registered in the Caymans with a single director, Viktor Petrov's cousin. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about what she was doing. She was a project manager, and this was her deliverable. She stalked out of her suite and through the dark, silent penthouse. The main living area was empty, but a single light spilled from under a set of dark, imposing doors. His study. She knocked. Once. Hard. "Enter." She pushed the door open. He was there at a desk the size of her old car, shirt sleeves of a crisp white shirt rolled up to his forearms, a glass of amber liquid next to his hand. He looked up, and for a second he looked almost tired. Then he saw her, standing there in her wrinkled suit, hair a mess, eyes burning with a manic, victorious light. She slapped the single-page printout on his desk. Her findings. "He's not just a traitor, he's a moron," she said, her voice hoarse. "He's skimming from the linen invoices." Linens. He's using a nested doll structure, but he didn't cover his digital tracks. The final holding company? It's registered to Petrov's cousin. Your exterminator found your rat, Mr. Costanzo. Dante stared at the paper. Then he looked up at her, a slow, dangerous, and genuinely impressed smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she'd seen him smile. It transformed his entire face, turning him from lethally handsome to something devastating. "You are good," he said, his voice rough with something new. Admiration. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. He was too close again, but this time it was different. The power dynamic had shifted. She had delivered. "You're exhausted," he said. It wasn't a question. He reached up and she flinched, but he just brushed a stray piece of hair from her face, his thumb grazing her temple. The touch was feather light, but it lit a fire on her skin, a sizzling electric current that shot straight down her spine. "Your first project is complete," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. The air was so thick she couldn't breathe. "Your next one is me." She looked up at him, confused, captivated. "What?" You're a ghost now, Elara. You don't exist, which means you're the perfect person to be by my side. He stepped back, the moment broken, but the air was still charged. The Costanzo Group has legitimate businesses. Charity boards, real estate, global shipping. I need a public-facing EA. A shark in a blazer who can run a meeting and organize my public life. You want me to be your actual assistant? I want you to be my shadow, he corrected. You'll be at every meeting, at every party. You'll be the polite, organized, terrifyingly competent face of my legitimate world. His eyes darkened. And you're going to keep your eyes open. You're going to watch everyone. You're my Gantt chart, Elara, my early warning system, because Marco was just one pest. The nest is much, much bigger. Chapter 4. Trial by Fire. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in disorientation. Elara slept, ate, and breathed in the gilded cage of her suite. Leo, Dante's head of security, a man who looked like he'd been carved from a block of granite and given a bad haircut, had been her sole point of contact. He'd onboarded her, which involved a 2-hour lecture on security protocols, handing her a new encrypted laptop and phone, and informing her that her entire previous life had been archived. Her apartment was gone, the lease broken. Her few possessions, clothes, books, a framed photo of her parents, had been delivered in sterile plastic bins, then immediately confiscated by a silent woman who declared them security risks and aesthetically unacceptable. Mr. Costanzo has provided a new wardrobe for you, the woman had said, gesturing to a walk-in closet that was now bursting with clothes Elara had only ever seen in magazines. It was another flex of his power. He hadn't just bought her debt. He was now curating her skin. Elara, true to form, had spent those 3 days doing the only thing she knew. She worked. She took Dante's legitimate businesses, the shipping company, the real estate firm, the import-export group, and she tore them apart. She built workflows, she created communication trees, she designed a new centralized reporting system that would feed everything, from every manager, directly to her, and then to him. She was, in effect, making herself the one gate she'd described in her disastrous interview. She was building her Gantt chart on the foundations of a criminal empire, and it was the only thing keeping her sane. On the 4th day, Dante summoned her. "We have a public appearance," he'd said, standing in her new office, looking infuriatingly handsome in a simple black t-shirt and suit trousers. "The City Library Foundation Gala. It's tonight. Be ready at 7. And now, she was. Ready, at least, was a relative term. Elara stared at the woman in the mirror. The woman was a stranger. The dress Dante had provided was a sheath of liquid midnight, a deep sapphire blue silk that clung to every curve she hadn't known she possessed. It was sleeveless, with a neckline that was both high and suggestive, and a slit up the side that made her entire left leg feel naked. Her hair had been wrangled by another silent, terrifyingly efficient woman, pulled back into a complex, sleek chignon. The only jewelry, also provided, was a pair of delicate, leaf-shaped diamond earrings. They were, she was sure, worth more than her father's house. She was a project, a perfectly managed, beautifully presented asset. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to her reflection. "This is a costume. I'm a project manager, not this. Sir is waiting." Leo's voice, flat and devoid of emotion, came from an intercom. Elara took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and walked out of her cage. Dante was standing by the penthouse windows, staring out at the city. He was in a tuxedo that was so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been sculpted onto his body. He turned as she approached, and his eyes moved. It wasn't a glance. It was a slow, deliberate inventory, from her sleek hair, down the line of her throat, over the curve of her bust and hips, all the way to her feet, which were crammed into towering, silver, impossibly painful-looking heels. His gaze was so intense, so possessive it felt like a physical touch. A hot, scalding brand. "You look acceptable," he said, his voice a low purr. "And you look like you're about to murder James Bond," she retorted, her voice sharp with nerves. A flicker of that dangerous smile touched his lips. "Close. He's on the board of a rival shipping firm. I might have him audited." He held out his arm. "Elara." Her name in his mouth was a command. She slid her hand into the crook of his elbow. His bicep was solid rock beneath the fine wool. The heat from his body seeped into her skin, and she fought the shiver that threatened to run down her spine. The gala was a shark tank. Elara felt it the second the elevator doors opened onto the massive, vaulted ballroom of the city library. The air was thick with the scent of old money, expensive perfume, and quiet, ruthless ambition. This was the other battlefield. The one fought with smiles, air kisses, and backroom deals, instead of in boardrooms with silent, terrifying men. Dante Costanzo's arrival was a silent bomb. The room didn't stop, but it tilted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The ghost did not do public events often, and he never brought a date. And now here he was with a complete unknown on his arm. Elara could feel the eyes on her. Hundreds of them. Curious, jealous, calculating, dismissive. They were analyzing her dress, her jewelry, her proximity to the city's most dangerous, enigmatic man. They were trying to solve the problem of her. "Your new asset is causing a stir, Dante." The voice was smooth, but laced with a familiar, reptilian charisma. Marco Rinaldi. He stood before them, a champagne flute in hand, his cruel, handsome face split in a wide grin. He looked, Elara thought, like a predator that had just cornered its favorite meal. His eyes weren't on Dante. They were on her, raking over her body with a greasy, possessive familiarity that made her skin crawl. "Marco," Dante said, his voice lethally polite. "I didn't realize you were a patron of the literary arts." "Oh, I'm a patron of all beautiful things," Marco purred, his gaze dropping to the swell of her breasts before lifting to her eyes. He took her hand, the one not attached to Dante, and brought it to his lips, his thumb brushing slowly across her knuckles. "Dante keeps you hidden away. I see why. A flower as exquisite as you should be tended to, not kept in the shadows." Elara's stomach turned. But she wasn't the terrified girl in the boardroom anymore. She was Dante's early warning system. She was his shadow, and she was done being underestimated by men like this. She smiled, a bright, knife-edged expression that didn't touch her eyes, and slowly, deliberately, pulled her hand from his grasp. "Oh, I'm not a flower, Mr. Rinaldi," she said, her voice clear and carrying, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I'm the gardener. I just pull the weeds." The silence that followed was electric. Marco's smile froze, his eyes flashing with a sudden, surprised venom. Beside her, Dante went utterly still. She felt, rather than saw, his reaction. A subtle tensing of his arm, a sharp, quiet intake of breath. He was impressed. No, it was more than that. It was pride. Before Marco could reply, Dante's free hand landed on her bare back, just above the low dip of the gown. His palm was hot, his fingers splayed wide in a gesture of unmistakable, absolute ownership. The jolt of his skin on hers short-circuited her brain. It was a brand, a claim, a nonverbal mine that set her entire nervous system on fire. "If you'll excuse us, Marco," Dante said, his voice smooth as silk. "My assistant and I have board members to greet." He guided her away, his hand never leaving her back, steering her through the crowd. That was Ill-advised, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. And yet effective, she countered, breathless. He'll see you as a threat now, not just a prize. Good, she said, looking up at him. Let him. Dante's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her mouth. The world seemed to fade for a second, the noise of the gala receding to a dull roar. There was only the heat of his hand on her back and the possessive, hungry look in his eyes. The moment was shattered by Viktor Petrov. Costanzo! The Russian's voice was a gravel slide. Dante's hand dropped from her back as he turned, his entire body shifting into a relaxed, lethal posture. Elara had to fight not to take a step back. Petrov, Dante greeted, his voice cool. I'm surprised to see you. I thought libraries were above your pay grade. Petrov's pale eyes flickered to Elara, and his thin lips curled in something that was not a smile. I am here for this acquisitions. This library is full of rare, valuable things. Things that do not belong to the children. His gaze lingered on Elara, cold and appraising. You have a new book. Elara is my new executive assistant, Dante said, his voice flat. Yes, your Gantt chart. Petrov chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. This Don of yours, Malishka, he said to Elara. He is a boy playing a man's game. He hides behind spreadsheets and assistants. Because he is soft. Corporate. Victor, Dante warned, his voice soft. Dangerously soft. He thinks he can build an empire from a glass tower. But empires are built on blood, on fear. He forgets this. He bleeds. And so do his little toys. It happened in an instant. Elara, needing a breath, had taken half a step back, separating herself from Dante. Petrov's hand shot out and clamped around her bare arm. His grip was a manacle of iron. You are a very pretty toy, but you will break. Easily. Before Elara could even gasp, Dante was there. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a brawl. It was work. It was the cold, fast, terrifying efficiency she had imagined. Dante didn't raise his voice. He didn't move his body. He simply took Petrov's wrist in his left hand, and his right hand clamped down on the Russian's forearm. He squeezed. There was a wet, sickening snap that was louder than any sound Elara had ever heard. Petrov's eyes went wide, a strangled grunt of pure, agonized shock tearing from his throat. His grip on Elara vanished. Dante released him, stepping back and smoothing the front of his tuxedo jacket, his expression utterly impassive. My assistant, he said, his voice a blade of ice in the sudden, horrified silence, is not to be touched. Petrov, clutching his broken wrist, face pale and beaded with sweat, just stared at him, his eyes filled with a new, murderous hatred. You're done, Costanzo, he hissed. No, Victor, Dante replied, taking Elara's arm, gently, and pulling her behind him. You are. He hauled Elara out of the gala, Leo and 2 other mountains in suits appearing from nowhere to clear a path. They were in the armored Bentley, the doors thudding shut before Elara had taken a full breath. The car peeled away from the curb, a silent, luxurious tank. The adrenaline and tension in the small enclosed space were suffocating. Elara was trembling, the phantom pain of Petrov's grip on her arm, the sound of his bone breaking. Dante said nothing. He stared straight ahead, his jaw so tight Elara thought it might shatter. He was furious. She could feel the rage rolling off him in palpable, terrifying waves. She started, her voice a squeak. I'm sorry, You are never, he interrupted, his voice a low, vicious snarl as he turned to her, his eyes black and burning in the darkness of the car. To be more than 2 feet from my side? You don't speak to anyone unless I am there. You don't go anywhere unless I send you. Do you understand me? She was trembling. But it wasn't just from fear. It was from the raw, undiluted, possessive fury in his voice. He wasn't angry at Petrov. He was angry at her. Angry that she was in danger. Angry that he cared. This wasn't a boss scolding an employee. This was a king, enraged that someone had dared to touch his most prized possession. Chapter 5. The First Kiss and the First Kill. The ride back to the penthouse was 5 minutes of the most suffocating, charged silence Elara had ever experienced. The air in the Bentley was too thick, vibrating with Dante's contained rage and her own adrenaline-fueled terror. She sat perfectly still, her hands clenched in the sapphire silk of her gown, the sound of Petrov's wrist snapping playing on a sickening loop in her head. Dante did not look at her. He just stared forward, his carved-in granite profile rigid, the muscle in his jaw ticking a furious, silent rhythm. The elevator ride up was worse. Trapped in the small mirrored box, she was hyper-aware of him. The heat of his body, the clean, sharp scent of vetiver and wool, the sheer coiled power thrumming just beneath his skin. He was a panther in a cage, and she was locked inside with him. The doors opened to the dark, silent penthouse. He strode in, shedding his tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto a chair, his movements sharp, angry. Elara stumbled in after him, her impossibly high heels catching on the plush rug. That was the final straw. The terror, the adrenaline, the violence, the dress. It all broke. "This isn't a project!" she suddenly shrieked, the words tearing out of her. Dante, who had been halfway to the bar, froze. He turned, slowly. "This isn't a Gantt chart!" she yelled, her voice echoing in the vast, empty room. She was trembling from head to toe, hot, furious tears blurring her vision as she ripped the diamond earrings from her lobes and threw them onto a table. You broke his arm. You just snapped it. Like a breadstick. Who does that?" "I do," Dante said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He began to walk toward her, his pace slow, measured, predatory. This isn't corporate," she babbled, backing away until the back of her legs hit a sofa. "You can't just reorganize someone's bones because they're a friction point." "I can," he said, "and I did." He was in front of her now, close enough for her to see the fury still burning in the black depths of his eyes. "He touched you. He threatened you. He called you a toy." "And you call me an asset," she shot back, her voice breaking. "What's the difference?" "Why did you do this to me? Why did you drag me into this nightmare? Why me?" She hadn't realized she was crying until he reached up, his hand hovering, his expression tight. He looked, for a fleeting second, completely lost. "Why me, Dante?" she whispered, the fight suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, desperate exhaustion. "Out of all the people, why did you pick me? You could have just let me go. Why are you doing this?" He stared at her, his jaw working. The rage was still there, but it was warring with something else. Something raw and vulnerable that stripped away the cold ghost persona. "Because," he said, his voice a rough, pained growl. "You are the only person in my life who isn't a liar." Elara's breath hitched. "My entire world, Elara," he continued, his voice dropping, forcing her to lean in, "is built on a foundation of liars, sycophants who tell me what I want to hear, traitors like Marco who smile at my face and stab me in the back. Soldiers who follow orders but would kill me for a higher price. Every single person I know wants something from me. My money, my power, my name." He was closer now. His hands came up, not to touch her, but to brace themselves on the back of the sofa on either side of her, caging her in. The heat from his body was a wall. "And then you," he murmured, his gaze dropping from her eyes to her mouth. You walked into a room full of killers, terrified out of your mind, and you opened your portfolio. You talked about shrinkage and workflows and Six Sigma methodology. You're just real. You are the only real thing that has walked into my life in a decade." His vulnerability was more intimate than any touch. It was a confession, a brutal, honest admission that disarmed her more completely than any threat. He, the most powerful, dangerous man she had ever met, was lonely. She started, but she had no words. He was tending to her now, his gaze fixed on the red marks on her arm where Petrov had grabbed her. His touch was impossibly gentle as his thumb brushed over the angry skin. "He hurt you," he whispered, and the anger was back. But it was different. It wasn't cold. It was hot, protective, and aimed at the entire world for her. "I'm fine," she breathed, her entire body igniting at his touch. "You're not." His eyes lifted back to hers, and the air was gone, sucked from the room, from her lungs. There was only the few suffocating inches between them, charged with a tension so thick it was a physical thing. It was a living, breathing entity, coiling in her stomach, tightening in her chest, demanding release. He was staring at her mouth as if he were a man dying of thirst. She was staring at his. I should go," she whispered, her voice a traitorous, breathy invitation. "You can't," he whispered back. She knew she should push him away. She knew she should run. This man was a killer. He was her jailer. He was the darkness that had swallowed her entire life. But he was also the only man who had ever really seen her. He was the one who had cleared her debt. He was the one who had looked at her, terrified, and out of her depth, and seen competence. He was the one who thought she was real, and God help her. She wanted him. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to bolt. She didn't. She couldn't. Her eyes fluttered shut as his breath, warm and smelling of whiskey and power, ghosted across her lips. "Elara," he murmured, a final rough warning, and then he kissed her. It was not soft. It was not gentle. It was a crash. It was brutal, desperate, and full of all the pent-up tension, rage, and raw, possessive need of the last 4 days. It was the sound of Petrov's bone snapping. It was the silent, charged ride in the Bentley. It was his hand on her bare back, and his confession in the dark. His mouth claimed hers with a desperate, devastating hunger. One of his hands slid from the sofa to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her carefully constructed chignon, pulling pins loose, destroying the perfect, acceptable image he'd created. He was claiming her, the real, messy, terrified woman underneath. She kissed him back with the same desperate energy, her hands coming up to fist in the front of his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved beneath her feet. It was a kiss of possession, of frustration, of two people starved for something true, finding it in the most dangerous place possible. It was a complete, reckless, catastrophic surrender. His tongue swept into her mouth, and she met him, a low sound vibrating in her chest. He tasted of expensive whiskey, dark control, and a loneliness that matched her own. He pulled her flush against him, lifting her slightly, and she wrapped one leg around his, the slit in the dress giving her access, her bare thigh sliding against the hard muscle of his. He groaned against her mouth, a low, guttural sound of a man at his breaking point. He was about to... Ring! Ring! A phone. Not her new encrypted one, his. The sound was a violation, an ice-cold blade severing the white-hot connection. Dante broke the kiss, his chest heaving, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. He looked wrecked. "Do not," he growled, his voice thick. "Move." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hand visibly unsteady. He glanced at the screen, and in an instant, the ghost was back. His face shuddered. The passion was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal focus. He flipped the phone open. "Leo." Elara stood trembling, her body aching, her hair tumbling down one shoulder, her lips swollen and wet from his. Dante listened, his entire body going still. "Where?" he said, his voice pure ice. A pause. "Is he secure?" Another pause. "Good?" "Don't touch him. I'm on my way." He snapped the phone shut and looked at Elara. The man who had kissed her, the man who had confessed he was lonely, was gone. This was the dawn. This was the man who had broken a wrist without flinching. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your first project," he said, grabbing his tuxedo jacket from the chair. "You found the rat." "Now my men have retrieved him." Elara's blood turned to ice. "Marco, you have Marco." "He was at the port," Dante said, shrugging on the jacket, all business. "He was trying to run to Petrov." He walked to the elevator, then stopped, his hand on the call button. He looked back at her. She was a beautiful mess, his brand still on her swollen lips, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. This was the final test. She'd handled the boardroom. She'd handled the gala. She'd handled the violence. Now she had to handle the reality. "You wanted the job, Elara. You wanted to be my shadow." He hit the button. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. "Come," Dante Costanzo said, his eyes black and unreadable. "We're going to finish your project." Chapter 6. Blood, ink, and hostile takeovers. The elevator didn't go up. It went down. Elara's feet, still crammed into the silver stilettos that felt like instruments of torture, were lead weights on the marble floor. The kiss was still on her lips, a burning, whiskey-soaked brand. His taste, his scent, the rough desperation of his hands. It was all still there, a phantom limb of sensation that her body refused to let go of. And he was a monster. He was a monster who had just kissed her like she was the only real thing in his world. And now he was taking her to see the project she had helped him finish. She was an accessory. Her brain, the one that lived for clean lines and resolved tasks, supplied the term with horrifying clarity. Accessory before the fact. Conspiracy. She had found the why. Now he was going to show her the what. The ride down was a descent into hell. But it wasn't the fiery, chaotic hell she'd imagined. It was cold. It was silent. Dante stood on the opposite side of the small car, his back to the mirrored wall, his face an impassive mask of stone. The passionate, desperate man, who had confessed his loneliness, who had groaned against her mouth, was gone. The dawn was back. The ghost was in full control. Elara's own reflection was a cruel joke. A beautiful, terrified woman in a sapphire gown, hair tumbling from its pins, lips swollen and red. She looked like a debauched princess, not a project manager. She looked like she belonged to him. The thought sent a jolt of equal parts horror and heat through her. The elevator opened into a subterranean garage. Not the clean, well-lit one she'd seen, but a dark, cavernous space that smelled of salt, gasoline, and damp concrete. A black armored SUV was waiting, engine humming. Leo, the block of granite, was at the wheel. He didn't look at her as she slid in, Dante following her, a silent shadow. The drive was short, silent. They moved through the dark, sleeping arteries of the city, toward the water, toward the port. The warehouse was a massive, corrugated steel box at the end of a long, dark pier. The SUV rolled to a stop. "Wait here, Leo," Dante commanded. He got out. He didn't look back, didn't wait. He just expected her to follow. Her legs felt like they were moving through wet cement. Every instinct in her body screamed, "Run!" But where? Her old life was an archive. Her debt was paid. Her family was safe. And this man, this killer, this Don, this magnificent, terrifying monster owned her. He had bought her, body and soul, with $184,312.47, and a single, devastating kiss. She followed. The air inside the warehouse was cold, metallic. A single caged floodlight from the ceiling cast a pool of harsh white light in the center of the vast, dark space. And in the center of that light was Marco Rinaldi. He was tied to a simple wooden chair. He was not the preening, charismatic gardener from the gala. His handsome face was a ruin of swelling and blood. One eye was swollen shut. His silk shirt was ripped, stained dark. But as Dante and Elara stepped into the light, he looked up, and his one good eye, filled with a venomous, undiluted hatred, found her. "You," he spat, a bloody bubble forming at his lips. "You corporate bitch." "Hello, Marco," Dante said, his voice casual, as if he were greeting him at a board meeting. He walked a slow, deliberate circle around the chair. Elara remained frozen at the edge of the light, a statue in a silk dress. She did this," Marco gurgled, straining against the ropes. "Not you, Dante. You were always soft, corporate. You needed a secretary to do your dirty work." "She is," Dante said, stopping directly in front of Marco. "Infinitely more terrifying than you could ever imagine. She found your mess in under 12 hours. My men, the hard ones you respect so much, they couldn't find it in 6 months." Dante looked at Elara. His gaze was cold, appraising. He was testing her. This was the final, brutal line. "She is meticulous. She doesn't like loose ends, and you, Marco, are the loosest of ends." Elara's stomach churned. She was going to be sick, right here on the concrete floor, in her sapphire gown. "You're pathetic, Dante!" Marco yelled, his voice cracking. Hiding behind her. "What's next? You going to have her audit me to death? Bore me with a spreadsheet?" "That's an excellent idea," Dante said softly. He turned his head to Elara. "Tell him what you found." Elara's mouth was dry. She couldn't speak. The man in the chair was going to die, and he was going to die because of her pivot tables. "Tell him," Dante commanded. His voice wasn't a request. Elara's training, her muscle memory, the ingrained instinct of 1,000 brutal board meetings, took over. She locked her eyes on a point on the far wall, dissociating, becoming the project manager. You skimmed from the linen invoices," she said, her voice a dead, flat monotone. You were using a nested doll structure, but you didn't cover your digital tracks. You funneled the consolidated funds to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. It's registered to Viktor Petrov's cousin." Marco's face, what was left of it, went pale. The defiance vanished, replaced by a new, dawning animalistic terror. He had been caught. Not by a gun, but by an accountant. "You whore," he whispered, all the fight gone. Dante's hand moved faster than Elara's eye could follow. A backhand, sharp and brutal, that snapped Marco's head to the side. "That's Ms. Vance," Dante said, his voice quiet. He wiped his knuckles on a handkerchief. "And you will not speak to her again." He turned to Elara. She was trembling, her hands fisted at her sides, but she hadn't moved. She hadn't looked away. He nodded, a single sharp gesture of approval. It made her feel sicker than the violence. "Leo!" Dante called. The heavy footsteps of the security head echoed in the warehouse. "Take Ms. Vance back to the car," Dante ordered. Elara didn't need to be told twice. She spun, her heels clicking, and walked, almost ran, back into the darkness, toward the SUV. She fumbled with the door, her hands shaking, and piled inside. Leo followed, but he didn't get in. He just stood by the open passenger door, his hand on the frame, his gaze impassive, waiting. Elara sat, her heart hammering, her breathing shallow. She stared at the warehouse, a box of blackness. And then, through the silence of the port, she heard it. It wasn't loud. It was a dull, muffled thump. A sound so final, so absolute, it seemed to suck all the air from the world. Leo's posture didn't change. He just continued to wait. A moment later, Dante emerged from the darkness. He was smoothing his tuxedo jacket. His hair was perfect. His face was calm. He looked like he was returning from a slightly boring business dinner. He got into the back seat, behind Leo, not next to her. "Home, Leo," he said. The door shut. The SUV pulled away. The ride back was silent. Not charged, not angry. It was dead. The silence of a morgue. Elara said nothing. She just stared at her own hands, clenched in her lap. She had just facilitated a man's execution. Her Gantt chart was an accessory to murder. When they got back to the penthouse, the sun was just beginning to stain the eastern sky a pale, sickly gray. Dante walked to the bar and poured 2 tumblers of whiskey. He handed one to her. Her hand was shaking so badly, the liquid sloshed. She drank it in one go. It was fire, scalding a path down her throat, but it stopped the shaking. "Congratulations, Ms. Vance," Dante said, taking a sip of his own. "Your first project is officially finished." The casual, cruel use of her own words from the interview was a slap. He walked to his desk and picked up a new file. This one was thicker than the last. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table in front of her. "Marco Rinaldi is now, officially, missing," he said, his voice all business. "A tragic disappearance. A boating accident, perhaps. We'll decide on the narrative later. Unfortunately, his assets are in limbo. His legitimate holdings are frozen. His illegitimate ones are in chaos." He sat in the chair opposite her. "This is your new project. You have 48 hours. I want you to create a new, legal, corporate structure to absorb his shipping company, his restaurants, and all of his offshore holdings. The ones you found and the ones you haven't. I want it clean. I want it legal. I want it fast." Elara just stared at him, numb. You want me to merge his... "I want you to manage a hostile takeover," he corrected. "You're a ghost, Elara. You have no legal identity right now. You're the perfect person to be the interim director of a dozen new shell corporations. You will liquidate, you will transfer, you will consolidate. You will bind his entire empire to mine, and you will do it so cleanly that no one can ever trace the seams." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "You are my project manager. This is the project. No loose ends." He stood and left her there, in her ball gown, with a glass of whiskey and a dead man's empire on the coffee table. For a long time, she didn't move. The sun came up, painting the room in bright, cheerful colors that felt like a mockery. Then, slowly, Elara Vance reached down. She kicked off the silver stilettos. She pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall in a messy tangle around her shoulders. She stalked into her office, grabbed a legal pad and a pen, and stalked back out. She sat on the floor, tucked her sapphire-clad feet under her, opened the file, and went to work. Rage, she discovered, was a phenomenal motivator. She was a killer. She was a monster's accomplice. Fine. If she was going to be his asset, she was going to be the most efficient, terrifying, goddamn asset he had ever seen. She worked for 36 hours straight. She created a web of shell companies so complex it would take a team of forensic accountants a decade to unravel. She drafted fake buyout agreements. She initiated wire transfers from the Cayman account to a new, clean account in Switzerland before bouncing it through Delaware. She dictated letters to baffled, terrified offshore lawyers in a cold, precise monotone, threatening them with regulatory audits if they didn't comply. She created a PowerPoint deck. She titled it, Rinaldi Asset Absorption and Q3 Restructuring. When Dante found her, she was asleep, her head on the coffee table, surrounded by a sea of spreadsheets, legal pads, and empty coffee cups, still in the wrinkled, ruined sapphire gown. He stood over her for a long time, just watching her. He picked up the PowerPoint printout. He read the title. A slow, dark, appreciative smile touched his lips. He gently brushed the hair from her face. Her skin was warm. "My meticulous girl," he whispered, his voice rough with an admiration that was darker and deeper than she could possibly imagine. She had just laundered a dead man's fortune. She had just bound herself to him, not with a kiss, but with blood, ink, and a truly exceptional workflow. She was his. Chapter 7. Process, Progress, and Petrov. 3 weeks later, Elara Vance was running a budget review for the Costanzo family's entire logistics operation, and she was not happy. "This," she said, her voice sharp and clear in the sunlit boardroom, the same one she'd stumbled into a lifetime ago, "is a joke." She tapped the massive 80-inch touchscreen at the head of the table. A complex color-coded spreadsheet filled the screen. "Polly," she said, her tone that of a deeply disappointed schoolteacher. Polly the Hammer Giacconi, a 350-pound man who had, to Elara's certain knowledge, personally put 3 men in the hospital last week, actually winced. He sank lower in his chair, his massive hands looking comically large as he fumbled with the tablet she had forced him to use. "Yeah, Ms. Vance?" he mumbled, his gravelly voice sounding more like a nervous teenager's. "Your collections division is reporting a 14.8% operational loss. You're labeling it as client non-compliance. I'm labeling it as you keep breaking their legs before they tell you where the money is." "We've discussed this, Polly. The new workflow is clear. Threaten, then collect. Then, and only as a last resort, do we move to personnel reassignment. You are costing us money." The other 6 men at the table, all capos, all killers, all men who had run this city for decades, stared intently at their own tablets, none of them willing to make eye contact. In 3 weeks, Elara Vance had gone from the ghost's strange pet to the single most terrifying person in their organization. She was the one who controlled the money. She was the one who signed off on their expense reports. And she was the one who reported directly to the Dawn. "And your team is still not using the shared calendar for disposals," she continued, swiping to a new screen. "I had 2 different cleanup crews scheduled for the same pickup in the Bronx last night. That is a redundancy. That is inefficient. From now on, if it is not on the Gantt chart, it is not approved. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Ms. Vance," the table chorused, a low, respectful grumble. "Good. Now, let's talk about your Q4 projections." From the corner of the room, where he sat in a single, throne-like chair, separate from the table, Dante Costanzo watched. He didn't speak. He just watched, his face impassive, as his new project manager, his asset, systematically, efficiently, and with a terrifying, cold competence, brought his entire, centuries-old criminal organization to heel. She had transformed. The terror was gone, replaced by a brittle, diamond-hard focus. She wore her new uniform, a severe black sheath dress, hair pulled into a tight, aggressive bun, a pair of stark, black-framed glasses perched on her nose. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the goddamn warden. She had created in 3 weeks a new Costanzo group, a legitimate public-facing corporation. And she had, with parallel, ruthless efficiency, streamlined his illegitimate one. She was the one gate. All information, all money, all operations now flowed through her. She had become, in practice, his Donna, and every man in this room knew it. "Meeting adjourned," she finally said, closing her laptop. "I expect your revised budgets by end of day." The men filed out. A quiet, orderly procession, each of them nodding to her, then to Dante on their way out. Polly the Hammer actually gave her a nervous little wave. When the doors shut, Elara's shoulders sagged. The Donna mask fell, and the exhausted 26-year-old was back. She rubbed her temples, letting out a long, weary sigh. "You realize," Dante said, his voice a low, amused rumble from the corner, "that Polly Giacconi has personally strangled men for looking at him the wrong way, and you just workflowed him." "His workflow was sloppy," Elara muttered, turning to face him. "He was inefficient, and he keeps misspelling extortion on his expense reports. It's Tion, not Shun. It's driving me insane." Dante stood and walked toward her. The dynamic between them was a constant, simmering, unspoken thing. Ever since the night of the gala, the night of the kiss, the night of the thump, they hadn't touched. They worked, side by side, day and night. His study and her office were connected by a new, private door. They ate their meals together, arguing over shipping manifests and money laundering routes. They existed in a bubble of high stakes, high-tension intimacy that was more charged than any love affair. He had bound her to him with blood and paperwork, and now he was starving her of the one thing she found herself, horrifyingly, craving: his touch. "You've done well, Elara," he said, stopping in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "The Rinaldi assets are fully absorbed. Petrov has lost his foothold in the port. You cut the loose end." "It was a successful, hostile takeover," she said, her voice quiet, refusing to acknowledge the darkness beneath the words. She lifted her chin. "It's what you hired me for." "No," he said, his voice a low, rough growl. "I hired you to find a pest. You rebuilt my empire." His gaze was intense, hungry. The long, self-imposed fast was taking its toll on both of them. The air between them was so thick, so full of unspoken, desperate things that Elara's lungs ached. She started, but she didn't know what to say. That she lived in a state of constant, low-grade arousal? That she was terrified of him? And yet, he was the only thing that made her feel safe. That she was a monster's project manager and she was good at it? I like to finish my projects," she whispered. "Dante?" His name was a rough confession on her lips, and she hated herself for the weakness. "This... What? What is this?" "This," he said, his voice dropping, "is process. This is progress." He reached up, slowly, as if not to spook her, and his thumb brushed the shell of her ear, sending a J-volt of pure white-hot lightning down her spine. "And this," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth, "is the personnel reassignment." He kissed her. It wasn't a brutal crash like the first time. This was a slow, deliberate, devastating annexation, This was the hostile takeover she'd been waiting for. His mouth was firm, warm, and utterly confident. He wasn't taking this time. He was claiming. She melted, her hands coming up to grip his lapels, her body sagging against his. All the tension, all the fear, all the spreadsheets and the blood. It all dissolved, leaving only this. Him. He kissed her like he was tasting her, learning her. His tongue traced her bottom lip, a silent, demanding question. She parted for him, a small, desperate sound in her throat. He deepened the kiss, one hand sliding to her waist, the other cupping her jaw, holding her steady as he pillaged her mouth. It was a kiss of spreadsheets and murder and shared secrets. It was dark, and it was desperate. And it was the only true thing in her new, insane life. "You run my life, Elara," he growled against her skin, his lips moving from her mouth to her jaw, to the wildly fluttering pulse at the base of her throat. Every part of it. My money, my men, my city. He kissed the sensitive spot just below her ear, and her knees buckled. "Now let me run you." He was backing her against the boardroom table, his body a hard, demanding wall, his hand sliding from her waist down to her hip, his thumb brushing the edge of knock, knock, knock. The sound was a gunshot. "Boss!" Leo's voice, flat, urgent. Dante froze. He didn't move for a full second, his lips still pressed to her throat, his eyes squeezed shut in a mask of pure, undiluted frustration. "What?" he snarled, his voice a beast's growl. He pulled back, slowly. Elara's entire body was humming, her lips swollen, her glasses askew. She was a wreck. His wreck. "Enter?" Dante snapped. Leo opened the door. He held a simple brown cardboard box. He didn't look at Elara, but she could feel his awareness of the charged, disheveled state of the room. "This arrived," Leo said, his voice flat. "It bypassed our mailroom protocol. It was delivered by a private messenger directly to the front desk, addressed to the GANTT chart." Elara's blood turned to ice. Her new name. The one Dante had called her. The one only the men in this room knew. Dante's face was stone. "Give it to me." Leo placed the box on the table. It was small. A shoebox. "Elara," Dante said, his voice low. "Step back." She did, moving to the other side of the room. Dante, all business, all ghost, retrieved a small, sharp letter opener from the desk. He slit the tape cleanly. He opened the box. He didn't react. He just went utterly, terrifyingly still. "What?" Elara whispered, her voice trembling. "What is it?" He closed his eyes for a single, pained beat. Then he turned the box so she could see. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was the framed photo of her parents. The one from her apartment. The one Leo had supposedly archived and locked in a secure vault. The glass of the frame was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks obscuring her mother's smile. On top of the broken glass was a small white business card. Elara walked forward, her legs unsteady. She looked at the card. 4 words, in a simple, typed font. "The toy is broken. Soon the Gantt chart will bleed. VP*, Victor Petrov." Elara's hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked sound escaping. He had been in their vault. He had been in her past. He knew her name. Dante said nothing. He just reached into the box and lifted out the note. His movements precise. He looked at the broken photo of her family. Then he looked at her. And the man who had kissed her. The Dawn who had run the meeting. The ghost who had hidden in the shadows. They were all gone. Replaced by something else. replaced by a cold, murderous, and absolutely primal rage that was more terrifying than anything she had ever seen. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't a Don. He was a man. And someone had just threatened his woman. Chapter 8. The Algorithm of Betrayal. The silence in the boardroom was no longer the heavy, respectful hush of Dante's power. It was a vacuum. A cold, terrifying void, where the only sound was the frantic, hammering pulse in Elara's ears. Dante's rage, she realized, was not a fire. It was an Arctic winter. It didn't burn. It froze. He didn't move. He just stared at the broken picture, at the arrogant, typed note. The man who had been kissing her, the man who had been growling possessively against her throat, was gone. This was the ghost. And he had just been challenged. His first move was not toward Elara. He turned, his movements lethally calm, and faced his head of security. "Leo," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Leo, the block of granite, was the color of ash. "Boss." "You archived this," Dante stated. It was not a question. "You personally cataloged her possessions. You told me they were in the subterranean vault, level 4. "Yes, boss. They are. That should be impossible." "And yet," Dante said, picking up the shattered frame with a steadiness that made Elara's skin crawl. "Here it is." Elara's brain, that beautiful, panicked, analytical machine, was already working, pushing past the terror, trying to find the process. "The note, Dante," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. He looked at her. He called me the Gantt chart. Who? Who knows that name? Dante's eyes went black. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. He didn't have to answer. She already knew. Dante, Leo, and the 6 capos who had just left this room. Pauli, the hammer Giacone, the men she had just reprimanded for their inefficient disposal methods. The leak wasn't just a pest. It was in the room. It was one of them. Dante's hand, the one not holding the frame, slammed down on the intercom button on the table, the sound a singular, violent crack in the silence. "Lock down," he snarled. "The entire building. Now, no one in, no one out. Full communications blackout. I want every signal in or out of this tower cut. Now, Leo." Leo didn't hesitate. He spoke into his wrist. "Execute. Protocol Volkov. I repeat, Volkov." The word sent a visible jolt through him. This, Elara sensed, was a protocol that had never been used before. Dante finally turned to her. The rage was still there, but it was buried deep beneath a possessive, terrifying calm. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, a gesture that was almost tender, but his grip was a manacle. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice a low, rough absolute. My family," she whispered, her hand coming up to grip his wrist. "The photo, he broke the glass. He broke my mother's—" The personal, petty violation of it, the intimacy of the threat, was what finally broke her. A single, hot, furious tear escaped. He thinks he can just touch my things." Dante's expression hardened, the last flicker of humanity gone, replaced by a cold, primal purpose. "He will not," he said, "touch anything of yours or you ever again." "Dante, the leak," she pushed, forcing her brain to work. "It has to be one of the capos." Pauli. He was nervous. The others. They are all suspects. Dante cut her off, his voice flat. He was already pulling her, his hand locked on her arm, dragging her toward his private elevator. "You're not finding anyone. You're disappearing. You are a ghost, Elara. It's time to act like one." "Like hell I am," she spat, digging in her heels. The terror was still there, but it was being rapidly replaced by the same cold, brilliant rage that had gotten her through the Rinaldi ledgers. You hired me to find your pests, Dante. This is a pest. I am not a toy to be broken, and I am not a Gantt chart that bleeds. I am a project manager. And this is a project. We find the leak. We find him. He stopped, right in front of the elevator, and spun on her. He backed her against the wall, caging her in with his body, his hands braced on either side of her head. It was the same move he'd pulled in her suite. But this wasn't a power play. This was a shield. He was physically shielding her from the room, from the windows, from the world. You don't understand, he growled, his face inches from hers, his eyes burning with a dark, protective fire. This isn't a spreadsheet. This isn't an operational loss. This is a promise. He sent this to you. He did it to get to me. He thinks you are my weakness. He thinks he can unman me by threatening you. So let's be smart, she insisted, her hands flat on his chest, her entire body thrumming with his proximity and the adrenaline. He wants you to hide me. He wants you to be emotional. He called you corporate and soft. He is trying to make you soft. Don't let him. Let's find the process failure. Let's find the leak. His eyes roamed her face, a sort of savage wonder in them. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying anymore. She was trying to create a workflow for a manhunt. My God, he whispered, a rough, dark sound. You really are meticulous. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a terrifying, predatory baring of teeth. He thinks you're my weakness, Elara. He's wrong. You're my weapon. He hit the elevator button. You're right. We don't hide. We hunt. But not from here. The leak is in this building. A safe house? The elevator doors opened. He pulled her inside, his hand now possessively on the small of her back. No, he'll expect that. He'll have my known assets watched. The doors closed, sealing them in the small mirrored box. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving the raw, unfinished, desperate energy of their interrupted kiss hanging thick and heavy in the air. He was so close. She could smell the vetiver, the faint, clean scent of his skin, and the metallic tang of his rage. She was trembling, the come down from the terror making her weak. He was still holding the broken frame. He stared down at it, at the faces of her parents, at the spiderweb of shattered glass. His thumb traced the crack over her mother's face. He will pay for this, he said, his voice a low, lethal promise. Not for the threat, not for the challenge. He will pay for this, for touching what is mine. He looked up, and his eyes met hers in the mirror. The possessiveness in them was absolute. It was suffocating. It was, God help her, the only thing that made her feel safe. The elevator chimed, but not at the garage level. It opened into a high-tech, clinical white secondary garage she had never seen. A sleek, matte black Audi sat waiting. Where are we going? She asked, her voice quiet. Dante opened the passenger door for her. A dark, dangerous smile played on his lips. You're a project manager, Elara. You, of all people, should appreciate the value of resource reallocation. She got in. He slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a quiet, menacing hum. We're going somewhere he would never look, Dante said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as the garage door rolled up, revealing a private, hidden exit into a side alley. We're going somewhere that officially doesn't exist. A place that's currently tied up in probate, owned by a complex web of shell companies that not even I could untangle. He glanced at her, his eyes glinting in the dim light. At least not without a good accountant. Elara's brain caught up. Her eyes widened. Marco's penthouse, the one I absorbed. "Welcome to your new asset, Ms. Vance," he said, pulling out into the sparse midday traffic. "You legally own the building. Leo's name is on the deed of the shell that holds it. And as of an hour ago, Marco Rinaldi is officially, tragically, lost at sea. We're ghosts, Elara, hiding in a dead man's house." Chapter 9. Terms of Surrender. If Dante's penthouse was a monument to cold, minimalist power, Marco Rinaldi's was a shrine to tacky, narcissistic excess. It was all white leather, gold-plated fixtures, and black marble. Mirrors covered not just the walls, but ridiculously, the ceiling of the main living area. The centerpiece of the room was a white, crescent-shaped sofa that looked like it had been stolen from a 1970s sci-fi movie. The whole place smelled faintly of stale cologne and arrogance. "Well," Elara said, setting her encrypted laptop on a glass and gold desk that was shaped like a giant M. "He certainly had a brand." "He was a peacock," Dante said, his voice flat with disgust. He was pacing the length of the floor-to-ceiling windows, which overlooked a different, less impressive angle of the city. All feathers, no spine. They were in a tomb, a luxurious, gaudy tomb, 40 stories above the ground. Leo, after a grueling, silent drive, had met them in the secure garage, his face still pale. He had handed Dante 2 go-bags, a burn phone and a tablet. "The building is locked down, boss," Leo had said, his voice clipped. "The capos are secured, each in a separate conference room. They're cooperating. No one knows where you are, just me." "Keep it that way," Dante had ordered. "Find the leak, Leo. Tear the building apart. I want security footage, phone records, financial statements. I want to know if Polly Giacconi blinked twice in the last 6 weeks. Find the mole or don't bother calling me back." "Yes, boss." Leo had looked at Elara, his gaze unreadable, then vanished back into the elevator. Now, they were alone. Trapped. It had been 24 hours. 24 hours of suffocating, high-stakes, forced intimacy. They had been working side by side in the dead man's office, a pressure cooker of unspoken tension, stale air, and simmering fear. Elara was in overdrive. This was a problem, and she was going to fix it. "This is impossible," she muttered, glaring at the tablet displaying the Costanzo Tower's security logs. "The data is too clean. The vault's electronic logs show no unauthorized access. The mailroom manifest shows no unscanned packages. Petrov didn't just walk in. He had to have inside help. But who?" She was cross-referencing Polly's financials against the other capos. "Polly's alibi for the gala night is weird. He says he was at a pasta tasting in Queens for 3 hours, alone. Who does that?" Dante was on the burn phone, pacing the living room like a caged panther, his voice a low, violent growl. "I don't care what it costs. Find his family. Find his network. Find his dog. I want every asset Viktor Petrov owns, legitimate or not. Burn to the ground by morning. Liquidate him." He snapped the phone shut and threw it onto the sofa, raking his hands through his hair. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. He had shed his jacket and tie, and his white shirt was wrinkled, the sleeves rolled up his forearms, the top 3 buttons undone. He looked less like a Don and more like a pirate, all raw edges and contained, violent energy. "Nothing," he snarled. "My informants are all running scared. Petrov is deep in the shadows, and he's taken his whole network with him. He's preparing for a war." "Then he's exposed," Elara said, not looking up from her screen. "If he's reallocating assets for a war, he's moving money. If he's moving money, I can find him. I just need time." "Time," Dante said, his voice rough, "is the one thing we don't have." "He sent that note to you, Elara. That was a declaration. He's coming." He crossed the room and with a decisive click, closed her laptop. "Hey," she protested. "I was in the middle of a data sort." "Stop." "I can't stop." "He's coming. I have to." "You have to breathe," he said. He stood behind her chair, his large, warm hands landing on her shoulders. Her entire body seized, every nerve ending leaping to attention. They hadn't touched, not once, since that desperate, unfinished kiss in the boardroom. "You're wound so tight you're going to snap," he murmured, his thumbs finding the knots at the base of her neck. He began to knead, his touch firm, knowing, and absolutely electric. "Dante, don't," she whispered, her head falling forward in involuntary surrender. It felt too good. "I have to," he countered, his voice a low vibration against her ear. "You're trying to carry this. You're trying to manage it. But this isn't your project. This is mine, and you are under my protection." This isn't professional," she breathed, her eyes fluttering shut as a small, involuntary sound escaped her throat. "We are," he growled, so far past professional Elara. His hands stilled on her shoulders. He turned her chair slowly to face him. He crouched in front of her, so his eyes were level with hers. The raw, unfiltered need in his gaze stole the air from her lungs. The hunger from the boardroom was back, 1,000 times stronger, sharpened by the danger, by the fear. "He threatened you, Elara," he said, his voice hoarse. "He threatened your family. He put his hands on a picture of your mother. He did it all. To get to me." He looked, for the first time, not angry. He looked pained. "He thinks you're my weakness. My soft corporate vulnerability." He cupped her face, his palms warm and slightly rough against her skin. "He's wrong." Elara's own hands came up to cover his, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "He's not. I am your weakness, Dante, and God help me, you're mine." That was it. The final, absolute admission, the last term of surrender. He surged forward and kissed her. This was not the brutal crash of Chapter 5. It was not the confident annexation of Chapter 7. This was a surrender. A mutual, desperate, "We are going to die if we don't do this fall." His mouth was not demanding. It was pleading. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was his only air. He kissed her with all the fear and the rage and the terrible, lonely weight of his world. And she kissed him back with the same desperate force. She kissed him as an accomplice, as an asset, as the woman who had laundered his blood money and restructured his empire. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her body arching up from the chair. He groaned, a low, guttural sound that was pure, unfiltered relief. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "This is a bad idea," she murmured, her lips brushing his. This is a catastrophic, high-risk, project-derailing." "Shut up, Elara," he growled and kissed her again hard. Then he was moving. He scooped her up from the chair, one arm under her legs, the other around her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the warm, clean skin of his throat. "Where are we?" "To finish," he said, "what we started." He kicked open the door to Marco's master bedroom, and Elara, despite the white-hot haze of lust, actually barked out a laugh. The room was a monument to bad taste. A massive, round, red velvet bed sat on a raised platform. And yes, true to form, the entire ceiling was a giant, smoky mirror. "Oh my God," she giggled, the sound slightly hysterical. "This is tacky." Dante looked up at the mirror, then at the bed, and a low, rough laugh rumbled in his chest. It was the first time she had ever heard him laugh. He was a cliché to the very end. He tossed her onto the ridiculous bed, the velvet swallowing her. "Then close your eyes," he said, his own eyes burning down at her. He followed her down, caging her, his body a heavy, welcome weight. He didn't rip at her clothes. He was the ghost. He was meticulous. He undid the buttons of her blouse one by one, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are mine, Elara," he whispered, his lips tracing a line from her jaw, down her throat, to the hollow between her collarbones. "Not my asset. Not my assistant. Mine." "Yes," she breathed, her hands fisting in his shirt. It was the only word she knew. He was a meticulous lover. He worshipped and he dominated, a devastating, contradictory storm. He learned her body with the same intense, analytical focus he applied to a new asset, finding every place that made her gasp, every spot that made her arch off the bed. It was a claiming. It was a branding. It was a desperate, possessive act of finding life in a world built on death. He was marking her, branding her as his, a silent, primal fuck you to Viktor Petrov. He was erasing the fear, the blood, the spreadsheets, and replacing it all with him. Much, much later, they were tangled in the admittedly high thread count sheets, the mirrored ceiling reflecting a pale, pre-dawn light. Elara was boneless, blissed out, and drifting in a sleepy, sated haze. And then, as it always did, her brain rebooted. Her eyes snapped open. Oh my God! Dante, who had been lazily tracing the curve of her hip, tensed. "What? Regrets?" "No," she said, scrambling up, grabbing a sheet to cover herself. "No, not. Oh my God, I'm an idiot." She scrambled off the bed, grabbing her laptop from the office, ignoring her nakedness, ignoring his dumbfounded, aroused stare. "The pasta tasting." "Polly, I'm a moron." "Elara, what the hell are you talking about?" He sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist, revealing the hard, muscled planes of his chest. "I've been looking at it wrong," she said, her fingers flying across the keys. "I've been running algorithms to find income, who gained money, who was paid off. But Petrov is smart. He wouldn't pay. He would leverage." She pulled up a file. "I shouldn't have been looking for who gained money. I should have been looking for who lost it. Or who avoided losing it." "What?" Polly's pasta-tasting alibi was stupid, but his financials are clean. They're all clean. Too clean. She pulled up a new file and her blood ran cold. "Dante," she said, her voice a thin, terrifying whisper. "The vault. Level 4. It's subterranean. Who has the override codes besides you?" "Just one person," Dante said, his voice suddenly, terrifyingly cold. He was already out of bed, pulling on his trousers. "The head of my security. For emergencies." Elara turned to him, her face pale. "His sister. She has a rare blood disorder. She's been on a donor list for 2 years. She was just moved to the top of a private international registry last week. The one in Switzerland. The one Viktor Petrov controls." She pointed to the screen. "It's not Polly, Dante. It's not one of your capos." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a new, dawning, absolute horror. "It's Leo. The man he trusted with his life. The man he had just ordered to find the mole. The man who knew, right at this very second, exactly where they were." Chapter 10. The Foxhole. The name hung in the air. A final, devastating line of code that crashed her entire world. Leo. The man Dante trusted with his life. The man who had onboarded her. The man who had looked at her with those dead, impassive eyes while she, flushed and disheveled, had walked out of the boardroom after their first interrupted kiss. He had known. He had been watching. The man who, at this very second, was the only person in the world who knew they were in this ridiculous, mirrored, red velvet death trap. The silence that followed her revelation was not the charged electric silence of before. This was the cold, absolute silence of a vacuum, the silence of a tomb. Dante didn't swear. He didn't rage. He didn't move for 1, 2, 3 full seconds. The ghost simply processed the new, catastrophic data. His entire security network, his protocol Volkov, the lockdown of his own tower, it was all a lie. He hadn't been locking his enemies out. Leo had been locking them in. Elara watched, her heart a cold stone in her chest, as the man she had just given herself to, the man who had laughed at the tacky bed, vanished. He was gone. In his place was a creature of pure, arctic, cold purpose. He moved. He was off the bed in one fluid, silent motion, his body a weapon. He didn't look at his clothes. He walked, naked and utterly unself-conscious, to the go-bag Leo had provided and pulled out a matte black, wickedly efficient-looking handgun. He checked the clip, racked the slide. The sh-sh sound was the loudest, most final noise she had ever heard. "Dante?" Elara whispered, pulling the sheet to her chest, her voice trembling. "He knows. He knows we're here." "He doesn't just know," Dante said, his voice a flat, dead monotone as he pulled on his trousers and a black t-shirt. "He put us here." This wasn't a safe house, Elara. This was a holding pen. He tossed her clothes at her, the simple black sheath dress and the ridiculous glasses. Her uniform. "Get dressed," he commanded. "Now." Her fingers fumbled, thick and stupid with adrenaline. He's been listening. The phones, the intercoms in this building. Assume every surface has ears. Assume every camera is active, Dante said. He walked to the mirrored wall, his eyes scanning. Not his reflection, but the seams. He's been playing me for months. Petrov offering a cure for his sister. It was the perfect leverage. The one thing I couldn't top. He used my own protocol against me, cut me off from my organization, and stranded me with with you. The one weakness, the one soft corporate liability. Elara's brain, finally, blessedly kicked in. The panic receded, replaced by the cold, beautiful logic of project management. She was no longer a naked, sated lover. She was an asset in a catastrophic project failure. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking, but gaining strength. She pulled the dress on, not bothering with a bra. "Okay, we're in a compromised location. The primary operator is the antagonist. We have no external support. This is a containment breach." Dante actually stopped, his hand on the bedroom door, and looked at her. A flicker of that dark, savage amusement lit his eyes. "A containment breach? Elara?" "We need a new workflow," she insisted, her mind racing, clicking into familiar, efficient gear. She grabbed the encrypted laptop. "What are our assets?" "Me," he said, holding up the gun. "You, this laptop, one burn phone, and an apartment that is about to become a war zone. Our assets are shit." "The laptop is still connected," she said, her fingers flying. "He cut the main building Wi-Fi, but I'm still logged into the private Costanzo server through the burn phone's hotspot. He let me be. He wanted me to find him. He was bragging." "He wanted to break me," Dante said, his voice a low, vicious snarl. "He wanted me to know I'd been beaten, and how. He wanted me to know he'd used my own Donna to do it." "Then he's an idiot!" Elara spat, her rage finally finding its voice. "He's a sloppy, arrogant, inefficient peacock, just like Marco. He left a loose end. Me." She was typing, a flurry of keystrokes. "What are the exit routes?" "One elevator, keyed to this penthouse. One set of fire stairs, 40 floors down, Dante said, moving to the apartment's main door, listening. The elevator is a death trap. He'll be waiting, Elara said. The stairs will be fish in a barrel. What about the roof? Helipad, but no helicopter. It's a dead end. Okay. She took a deep breath. Okay, this is just a hostile takeover, but with guns. We need a new risk mitigation strategy. Elara, Dante said, and his voice was so soft, it cut through her frantic analytical haze. She looked up. He was standing in front of her, and the ghost was gone, just for a second, replaced by the man who had traced the curve of her hip. You are extraordinary, he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. His thumb was calloused, rough. You're in a kill box, and you're trying to create a flowchart. It's how I think, she whispered, her hands coming up to grip his wrist. It's the only way I'm terrified, Dante. I know. His gaze was a physical, possessive brand. So am I, not of them. Of this. He tapped his thumb against her pulse, which was hammering against his skin. You're it, Elara. My one gate, my single point of failure, and I will not let them have you. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate crash of their first, or the slow, claiming surrender of an hour ago. This was a soldier's kiss. It was hard, fast, and full of promises. It was goodbye and hello and I will kill the world for you, all in one brutal, bruising press of his lips. Stay behind me, he growled. Do exactly as I say. No arguments, no workflow suggestions, just obedience. Can you do that? Yes, she breathed. It was the easiest yes of her life. Good. He pulled her toward the front door. He held the gun in his right hand and grabbed her hand with his left, his grip a painful, reassuring vice. He was going to drag her physically to safety. He paused at the door, listening. Silence. The building is too quiet, he murmured. He's already here. He's not coming up. He's on this floor. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed. Back. Office. They moved, shadow-like, across the gaudy white marble. Elara had never known a human being could be so silent. Dante moved like smoke. She, in her sensible flats, felt like a clattering, clumsy child. They reached the M-shaped desk. He shoved her behind it. Stay down, he whispered, his eyes on the hallway that led to the private elevator. And then the sound. A soft, polite ding. The elevator. It was arriving. Dante raised his weapon, his body a perfect, coiled statue of lethal intent. Elara's heart stopped. She stared at the laptop screen, at the file she'd been working on. Leo's file, the proof. The elevator doors hissed open. Silence. I know you're in there, boss, Leo's voice called out. It was no longer flat, no longer the impassive granite. It was sad. And Miss Vance, please don't make this harder. He just wants the girl. He'll let you live, Dante. He just wants the GANTT chart. He can't have her, Leo, Dante yelled back, his voice a low, powerful roar. He was a lion, protecting his den. She's just a girl, boss. Leo sounded desperate. He has my sister. What was I supposed to do? He promised me. Just the girl. No one else gets hurt. You're a fool, Leo, Dante shouted. He'll kill her. Then he'll kill you. Then he'll kill your sister. That's his workflow, you know that. A long, painful silence. Elara was trembling so hard she was afraid her teeth would chatter. I don't have a choice, Leo's voice said, and it was broken. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. A new sound. The click, click, click of multiple heavy bootsteps on the marble floor. He wasn't alone. He had a team. Dante looked at Elara, his eyes black. It's time. Elara, he whispered, his voice inaudible to anyone but her. That laptop. The file, is it ready? She nodded, her eyes wide. Send it. To who? Polly. Her eyes widened. Polly, the hammer? But he's a killer. But he's my killer. He's loyal. He's just stupid. But he'll understand this. Her fingers flew. She attached the file. Leo, Petrov, sister, trap, M penthouse HELP. She hit send. The delivered receipt popped up. At the exact same second, the first shot rang out. It wasn't a bullet. It was a battering ram. Boom. They weren't coming from the elevator. They were coming through the front door. Leo had been the diversion. The main force was at the gate. The trap was sprung. Chapter 11. Breached. The front door of Marco Rinaldi's penthouse exploded inward, a shower of splintered oak and shattered steel. Office! Now! Dante roared, shoving Elara so hard she stumbled, a small, terrified cry ripping from her throat. He didn't wait to see if she'd made it. He dropped into a low crouch behind a laughably ugly white leather sofa, his weapon up, his face a mask of cold, concentrated fury. 3 men, clad in black tactical gear, swarmed in, fanning out in a practiced professional breach. They weren't Costanzo's men. They were Bratva, Petrov's. The first man through the door raised his rifle. He never got the shot off. Dante's handgun barked twice. Pop, pop. 2 quiet, economical sounds. 2 small, dark holes appeared in the man's chest. He crumpled without a sound. Elara, lock the door! Barricade it! Dante yelled, his voice a commanding crackle over the chaos. I'm not leaving you, she screamed back. She had made it to the office, but she was frozen in the doorway, her laptop clutched to her chest. That is an order, he snarled, taking aim at the second man, who was using the gold-plated M-desk as cover. The second man's rifle fire tore through the white sofa, sending stuffing and leather flying. Dante was already moving, rolling, using the chaos as cover. He was a ghost. A whisper of death. He flanked the man, his gun barking again. Another body hit the marble. Elara, galvanized by pure, unadulterated terror, finally slammed the office door. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely turn the lock. She heard it click, and for a half-second she felt safe. Then she heard the other sound, not from the living room, from the office's private balcony, the shh of a sliding glass door. She spun, her blood turning to a slush of ice. Victor Petrov stood there, silhouetted against the pre-dawn light. He wasn't in tactical gear. He was in a simple dark suit, his broken wrist in a sleek black cast. His nose was crooked, his face a mask of purple and yellow bruises from where Elara had slammed her head into it. Number. That hadn't happened yet. This was from Dante at the gala. No, Dante had broken his wrist. Her mind was fracturing. This was a nightmare. The Gantt chart, Petrov said, his voice a low, gravelly gurgle. He had a bloody nose. He smiled, a truly horrific sight, blood staining his teeth. You are more trouble than you are worth. Elara screamed. The sound of her scream, high and terrified, cut through Dante's focus. It was the one sound he couldn't block out. He had just dropped the 3rd tactical man and was face to face with the last. Leo. Leo stood in the ruined doorway, his handgun down, his face a mask of agonized betrayal. Dante, stop! He's... Elara's scream hit them both like a physical blow. Dante's face went white. "Petrov," he whispered. He didn't hesitate. He ran. He ran toward the office, abandoning the fight, abandoning all tactics. He ran toward her. He kicked open the door. He was too late. Petrov had her. His arm wrapped around her throat like a steel band. A long, thin, silver-bladed knife pressed against the pulse in her neck. Her laptop was shattered on the floor. "Drop it, ghost!" Petrov gurgled, pulling Elara back against his chest. Her feet, in their sensible flats, dangled uselessly. She was clawing at his arm, her eyes wide and white with terror. "Let her go, Victor," Dante said, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm rumble. He raised his gun, his hand rock steady, aimed directly at the Russian's head. "You will shoot her," Petrov sneered, shifting Elara's body to cover his own. "You are meticulous, yes? You will not risk your asset." "She is not an asset," Dante roared, the sound inhuman, a beast's protective snarl. "No!" Petrov chuckled and pressed the knife. A thin, bright red line of blood bloomed on Elara's white throat. The Gantt chart. She bleeds. Dante's hand wavered. Just a fraction. But it was enough. Elara's eyes, wide with terror, locked with his. She saw him. She saw the man of total control, the man who never lost. Losing, and she was furious. She was not a toy. She was not a project. She was not a Gantt chart. With a guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage, Elara did the one thing the project manager in her knew how to do. She acted. She didn't stomp. She didn't bite. She grabbed the knife hand with both of her own, and with all her strength, jammed her own body backward, ramming her head into Petrov's face. There was a wet, sickening crunch. Petrov howled, a strangled, agonized sound. His nose, already damaged, shattered. His grip on her throat loosened just for a second, but his grip on the knife tightened. It sliced, deep. A new, blinding, white-hot pain exploded across her neck. "Elara!" Dante's roar was the last thing she heard. He lunged. Petrov, howling, blood streaming from his face, hurled her aside. She crashed into the M desk, her head striking the gold-plated corner with a sickening thud. The world went black. Dante saw red. The world didn't narrow. It ended. There was no penthouse. There was no city. There was only the man who had just slit his Donna's throat. He fired. Pop, pop, pop. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the knees. He was not a Don. He was not a ghost. He was a monster. Petrov screamed, a high-pitched animal sound as his legs gave out. He collapsed. Dante was on him in a second, kicking the knife away. He put the barrel of his gun under Petrov's chin. "Dante! No!" Leo's voice. Dante had forgotten him. He felt the cold, hard press of a gun barrel against the back of his own head. "Don't!" Leo pleaded, his voice cracking. "Boss, please! He has my sister! If you kill him, she dies! Please, Dante!" "Please, don't make me do this." Dante froze. His entire body was a single vibrating wire of hate. He stared down at Petrov, who was gurgling, laughing through the blood. "You... see? Ghost!" Question mark Petrov spat. "Your softness. She's dead. Your weakness." Dante looked over at Elara. She was a heap. A broken doll in a black dress, a terrifying dark pool of blood spreading out from her neck and her head. Number. Not dead, but she was gone. "You lose, Dante," Leo whispered, his hand shaking, the gun rattling against Dante's skull. "Just let him go. Let me take him. I'll get my sister, and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Dante Costanzo, the man of absolute control, made his choice. He slowly, agonizingly lowered his weapon. He stood up, his hands raised, his eyes never leaving Elara's still, broken form. This was the personnel reassignment. This was the loose end. "Get him out," Dante said, his voice dead. Petrov, clutching his shattered knees, was dragged away by 2 more men who had appeared in the doorway. "Take the girl," he gurgled. The body. I want. "No," Leo said, his voice firm. "The deal was for her. Alive. Not this. The deal is off. We're gone." He was dragging Petrov. Petrov, too injured to fight, was forced to go. The elevator doors dinged open. Leo paused, his gun still trained on Dante. "I'm sorry, Dante. I really am." "You will be," Dante whispered, his voice a promise from the depths of hell. The elevator doors slid shut. Dante was alone. He stood, frozen, in the ruined, tacky, blood-spattered penthouse. Alone. For 10 seconds. Then he moved. He didn't run to Elara. He walked calmly to the shattered laptop. He picked up the burn phone that had clattered from her hand. He dialed. 1 ring. "Yeah?" Paulie, the hammer. Giacone's voice. Gravelly. Confused. "Did you get the memo, Paulie?" Dante's voice was unrecognizable. It was a flat, cold, dead thing. A long, long pause on the other end. ... Traitor Leo, penthouse M, protocol Volkov. Boss? What the fuck is... Leo is the traitor. He works for Petrov, and he just took Elara. Another, even heavier silence. Paulie, for all his stupidity, understood. The Donna was gone. "Boss!" Paulie's voice was a low, terrified rumble. "What?" "What are your orders?" Dante walked over to Elara. He knelt beside her. He saw, with a clarity that was almost blinding, that she was breathing. A shallow, hitched, terrible breath. The cut on her neck was bad. The gash on her head was worse. But she was alive. Petrov had left her. Leo had saved her. He had taken his boss, but he had left the girl. He had broken his deal with Petrov. Dante put 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was there. Thready. Weak. But there. "Dante," she whispered, her eyes fluttering, not seeing him. "I'm here, cara mia," he murmured, his voice breaking. He shrugged off his t-shirt, bunching it, pressing it hard against her neck. "I'm here." He picked up the phone again, his hand covered in her blood. "Paulie," he said, his voice no longer dead. It was alive. It was burning. "My orders?" "My orders are burn it all. You find Viktor Petrov. You find Leo. You use every man, every dollar, every bullet we have. I want his empire turned to ash by sunrise." And Leo, boss?" Dante looked at Elara's pale, bloody face. He thought of Leo's sister. He thought of Leo's betrayal. "Find him?" Dante Costanzo ordered, his voice the pure, cold sound of the grave. "And bring him to me." Chapter 12. Ash and Sutures. The world was a spinning, blurry void. A high-pitched whining sound filled Elara's ears. There was a wet, sticky warmth on her neck and a dull, catastrophic throbbing at the back of her head. She was cold. So cold. Through the fog, she heard a voice. It was distant. A low, terrifying rumble of thunder. "Every man, every dollar, every bullet we have. I want his empire turned to ash by sunrise." "Dante." She tried to open her eyes. The light was a splinter of agony. She was on the floor. The gaudy, gold-plated leg of Marco's M-desk was sharp against her cheek. "Dante?" she whispered. The word was a wet, broken sound. The thunder stopped. In an instant, he was there. A dark, frantic shadow blocking out the light. "I'm here, cara mia." His voice was rough, wrecked, a sound she had never heard from him. "I'm here. You're okay. You're alive." His hands were on her. One, bunched with his own t-shirt, was pressed hard against her neck. The other was impossibly gentle, his calloused fingers probing the gash on her head. Her blood was everywhere. On him, on her, on the white marble floor. "Cold," she mumbled, her teeth beginning to chatter. "Shock." Her project manager brain supplied the word, detached and clinical. Catastrophic blood loss. System failure imminent. I know, Elara. I'm going to move you. It's going to hurt." He didn't wait for a reply. He was a machine, driven by a cold, desperate purpose. He slid one arm under her back, the other under her knees, and lifted her. A strangled cry of pain tore from her throat as the world spun, a nauseating black and gold kaleidoscope. He didn't put her on the sofa. He strode, his steps sure and fast, into the master bedroom, into the lair of the tacky red velvet bed. He laid her down gently on the high thread count sheets, the mirrored ceiling reflecting their bloody, desperate tableau. He was shirtless, his chest and arms gleaming with a light sheen of sweat, his hands dark and slick with her blood. He was the most terrifying, beautiful thing she had ever seen. The burn phone on the nightstand, Leo's phone, rang, a shrill, piercing sound. Dante ignored it. He was ripping open the go bag Leo had so helpfully provided. "He packed a full trauma kit," Dante snarled, his voice a low, vicious thing. "The meticulous, traitorous bastard. He planned for this." He pulled out sterile gauze, bandages, antiseptic, and a suture kit. The phone kept ringing. "You should answer," Elara whispered, her vision tunneling. The Burn It All project." "My project," he growled, ripping open a packet of gauze with his teeth, "is you." The phone stopped, then immediately buzzed with a text. Dante glanced at it, his eyes narrowing. He grabbed it, his bloody thumb smearing the screen. He hit call. "What?" he snapped. He was listening, his gaze fixed on the bleeding 1-inch slice on her neck. "Then you burn it," Dante ordered, his voice dropping to an Arctic cold whisper. Elara could hear the tinny, frantic shouting of Polly, the hammer, on the other end. "Boss, they're barricaded in the shipping office. They've got—" "I don't care what they have, Polly," Dante said, his voice lethally calm. He was cleaning her wound, his touch firm, precise, impersonal. It stung and she hissed, "You are the hammer." "I suggest you find a nail. You have your orders, burn it all, am I clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. He tossed the phone onto the bed and looked at her. The ghost was gone. The desperate, terrified man was back. "This is going to hurt," he said, his voice soft. He was holding a suture needle. "I need you to stay still. Can you do that for me, Elara? Can you be my meticulous girl and stay still?" She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. He went to work. His hands, though stained, were surgeon steady. He was a man of contradictions. He could break a bone with one hand and stitch a wound with the other. The needle pierced her skin. A sharp, clear, biting pain. She gasped, her hands fisting in the velvet comforter. "I know. I'm sorry," he whispered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm sorry, Cara, just talk to me. Keep talking, tell me. Tell me about your 5-year plan." A small, hysterical, bloody laugh bubbled in her throat. My 5-year plan did not involve getting restructured by a Russian on a red velvet bed. A rough, pained sound that might have been a laugh rumbled in his chest. We'll adjust the deliverables. He continued to stitch, his movements quick, efficient. He was halfway done when the phone rang again. He snarled, a low, animalistic sound of pure frustration, and snatched it. What? A different voice, one of his capos. Boss, Polly's lit the entire port. The linen containers? He's burning the whole warehouse, to the ground, with Petrov's men, in it. Dante's eyes closed. He was still holding the needle in Elara's skin. Good. Tell him to mitigate. Shrinkage. No survivors. He hung up. He looked back at Elara. She was watching him, her eyes wide, hazy with pain, but aware. She had heard it. She had heard the casual, cold-blooded order to burn men alive. He started, his voice rough. You're a monster, she whispered, and a single pained tear tracked from her eye into her bloody hair. Yes, he said, his voice raw. He didn't deny it. He finished the last stitch, his movement sharp, final. But I am your monster, Elara. They will never touch you again. He cut the thread and immediately moved to her head. The gash was bad, matted with blood and hair. This one is deeper. I can't stitch this. I have to get you out of here. I have to get you to a doctor. No, she whispered. No, hospital. Loose end, remember? He froze, his hands hovering over her. She was right. He couldn't take her to a hospital. It would be a record, a paper trail. He was trapped. Dante, she murmured, her hand cold and weak, fumbling for his. He seized it, his grip a desperate, crushing vice, his bloody palm against her clean one. Your workflow is messy. Disposal. Collections. All in. One night. Very inefficient. He let out a strangled, broken sound. Shut up, Elara. Just shut up. Don't be you right now. Just be alive. He used the last of the gauze to create a thick, heavy pressure bandage for her head, his movements frantic, less precise now. The cold was getting to her body shaking in the first, violent stages of shock. He threw the medical supplies aside and ripped the heavy, ridiculous red velvet comforter off the bed, wrapping her in it, cocooning her. He slid onto the bed behind her, pulling her back against his chest. He was a furnace. He wrapped his arms around her, his hand pressing the bandage to her head, his other arm a steel band around her waist, sharing his heat. He was still covered in her blood. She was wrapped in a dead man's comforter. The room's mirrors reflected the carnage. It was a macabre, grotesque, and horrifyingly intimate embrace. Don't you dare archive me, Costanzo, she slurred, her consciousness fading, her head resting on his shoulder. Not a chance, Miss Vance, he whispered, his voice thick, his lips brushing her matted, bloody hair. You're not a project. You're a core competency. I am not letting you go. He held her, his body a shield, a furnace, an anchor. He held her as she shivered, as her breathing hitched, as the world of sirens and screams and fire raged outside the walls of the penthouse. This was his shadow war. He was waging it from a dead man's bed, with his entire world bleeding out in his arms. He sat there for hours. He didn't move. He just held her, pouring his own life, his own heat into her, willing her to stay. He watched the sun begin to rise, painting the gaudy room in hues of pale pink and orange, the colors of new blood. The burn phone, silent for a long time, vibrated on the sheet. He reached for it, his movements slow, unwilling to jostle her. He answered. Boss. It was Polly. His voice was quiet, subdued. It's done. Ash. The entire port is ash. Petrov's assets are secured. His network, it's broken. Dante said nothing. He just watched Elara's chest rise and fall. A shallow but steady rhythm. And boss? Polly's voice was hesitant. We got him. We found him, trying to get to the Swiss consulate. He didn't fight. Leo? Dante's grip on Elara tightened, his entire body going rigid. The rage, which had been banked by his fear for her, came roaring back, a cold Arctic fire. Where is he? Dante's voice was dead. We have him, boss. Secure what? What are your orders? Dante looked down at the woman in his arms. He looked at the crude black stitches on her pale throat. He looked at the blood-soaked bandage on her head. He thought of her laugh, her bright, cutting sarcasm, her insane, beautiful, meticulous mind. He thought of Leo's betrayal. He thought of his sister. Bring him, Dante Costanzo said, his voice the pure, cold sound of the grave. To the warehouse. The one on Pier 12. The one Marco liked. A pause. And Polly? Yeah, boss? Find Dr. Al-Jamil, the one who retires old boxers. Bring him here, to the M penthouse. Tell him I have a personnel reassignment that needs his discretion. Tell him to bring his entire bag. Now. He hung up. The war was over. The traitors were caught. He had won. He looked down at Elara. She was asleep, her breathing shallow but even. The bleeding had slowed. She was alive. He had won. And it had cost him everything. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes for the first time in 2 days. The mirrored ceiling reflecting the image of a monster, covered in blood, cradling his only, his real possession. And for the first time in his life, the dawn, the ghost, the killer, prayed. Epilogue. 1 year later. The boardroom was brighter. That was the first, most obvious change. The heavy, obsidian black table that had felt like a coffin lid was gone, replaced by a massive single slab of polished, cream-colored travertine. The 90-story view of the city was no longer a bleak, intimidating backdrop. The floor-to-ceiling windows were unobscured, flooding the room with the clear, sharp light of a Tuesday morning. At the head of the table, where Dante Costanzo had once sat silhouetted in shadow, sat Elara. She clicked a small black remote. The 80-inch screen behind her changed. A new slide, rendered in a clean sans serif font, appeared. Q3 Performance Review and Q4 Strategic Outlook. Donna E. Costanzo, Chief Operating Officer. Good morning, gentlemen, Elara said, her voice crisp and cool, echoing in the quiet room. She wore a severe but stunning charcoal gray dress, her hair pulled into a sleek, impossibly tight bun. The only hints of softness were the thin silver chain at her throat and the simple, obscene diamond on her left hand. Let's begin. The 6 capos seated at the table, Polly, the hammer, Giacconi among them, sat bolt upright, identical encrypted tablets open in front of them. Overall, Elara began, Q3 revenue is up 18.4%, which is excellent. We've fully absorbed the Rinaldi assets, and the new streamlined logistics workflow is adequate. She paced, her heels clicking softly. However, operational losses in the long-term loans division are still unacceptable. She aimed the remote, and a new slide appeared, this one a pie chart of beautiful, terrifying simplicity. Polly, she said, her voice dangerously pleasant. Polly, who had lost 50 pounds and now wore a reluctant tie to these meetings, visibly tensed. Yes, Donna? Your client retention metrics are technically 100%, which on its face is excellent. But your client satisfaction metrics are non-existent because your team's personnel reassignment protocol is still being initiated before the first payment is even missed. She zoomed in on a data point. You are breaking assets that still have value. We are not in the business of terror, Polly. We are in the business of profit. Terror, she added, her eyes flicking over the table, is just a tool for risk mitigation. It is not the goal. My memo on this was, I thought, very clear. The new workflow is collect, then leverage, then, and only then, do we move to archiving. Am I understood? Yes, Donna, Polly mumbled, furiously taking notes on his tablet. Clarity. Workflow. Got it. Good. Elara smiled, a bright, cold expression that made every man in the room shift in his seat. Because Q4 is about expansion, not sloppy cleanups. We are moving into the Swiss market. The financials have been secured. The shell corporations are in place, and our new regional manager is already operational. She clicked to her final slide. That is all. I expect your revised Q4 projections by 5. The men stood, a collective scraping of chairs. They filed out, each one pausing to nod respectfully. Donna. Mrs. Costanzo. Elara waited until the door hissed shut, the heavy soundproofed latch clicking into place. The Donna mask, the cold, brilliant COO, dissolved. She let out a long, shuddering sigh, her shoulders slumping. She reached up and, wincing, rubbed the back of her neck where the bun was pulling too tight. You were a little hard on Polly. A low, amused voice rumbled from the corner of the room. He's trying. He even used synergy in his last report. Dante emerged from the shadows. He had been there the entire time, sitting in the same single, throne-like chair as before, a silent, watchful guardian. He wore no suit, just black trousers and a soft gray Henley that pulled taut across his shoulders. He was, as always, her ghost. He's not trying, Elara muttered, turning to face him. He's lazy. He thinks a hammer is the solution to every problem. It's inefficient. Dante crossed the room, his movements the same fluid, predatory grace, but the coldness was gone, replaced by a warm, possessive focus that was reserved only for her. He's a killer, Kara. Not an MBA. He can be both, she retorted. Dante stopped in front of her, caging her between his body and the travertine table. And you, he murmured, are terrifying. You know that, don't you? My Donna, my chief operating officer. Someone has to keep this organization from running itself into the ground with operational losses, she said, her voice a little breathless. He was too close. He was always too close, and it was never, ever enough. Is that so? His hands came up, not to her waist, but to her face. His thumbs, calloused and warm, brushed her cheeks. My meticulous girl. His gaze dropped. He leaned in, and the kiss was not the desperate crash of their first, or the claiming annexation of their second. This was a kiss of pure domestic intimacy. It was warm and slow and confident. It was the kiss of a man who knew, without question, that she was his, and he was hers. It was a kiss that tasted like home and safety and absolute shared power. He pulled back, his lips brushing hers. You're a monster, Elara. I learned from the best, she whispered back, her hands sliding up his chest, fisting in the soft cotton of his shirt. His expression sobered. His thumb moved from her cheek, tracing a faint silver line that ran from just below her ear down the side of her throat. The knife scar. He did this every day, as if to reassure himself that it was healed, that she was still there. No regrets? He asked, his voice low. It was a question he asked her often. She thought of the last year. The painful, grueling recovery. The physical therapy for her head injury, which had left her with a faint, star-shaped scar at her hairline, now hidden by her hair. She thought of the slow, brutal consolidation of his power. Of their power. My 5-year plan didn't account for this, she said, gesturing around the magnificent boardroom. But the deliverables are substantial. My family is safe, living in a house in Florida I paid for with consulting fees. They're happy, and I'm good at this. You are, he agreed, his voice rough. You're better than I ever was. You're the brain. I'm just the ghost, she finished for him, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. You're the risk mitigation. I'm the strategic outlook. A perfect system, he murmured. He kissed her again, hard and fast, a flash of the old, desperate heat. What about our regional manager? Elara asked, pulling back just enough to breathe. Did you get his report? Dante's eyes darkened, the humor fading. I did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out, not a phone, but a single folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. It was a bank ledger. A simple, clean statement from a private Swiss bank, showing a series of complex, untraceable transactions that had, in the last 24 hours, funneled nearly $1 billion from Viktor Petrov's, or rather, his cousin's, frozen assets into a new, clean Costanzo holding company. At the bottom of the page, in a familiar, precise, and rigid handwriting, were 2 words. Project complete. L. Leo. Elara would never forget that night, a week after the attack, after the brilliant, terse Dr. Al-Jamil had stitched her head and pumped her full of antibiotics. Dante, his face a mask of cold, dead rage, had gone to the warehouse on Pier 12. To Leo. And Elara, against all medical advice, had made him take her. She'd sat in the SUV, pale and weak, watching on a monitor as Dante had confronted the man who had betrayed him. The man who had also, in the end, saved her by leaving her for Dante to find. She's alive, Dante had said, his voice a dead thing. Thank God, Leo had whispered, his face a ruin of tears and terror. Her life. For your sisters. That was the deal you made with him, and you kept it. You broke your deal with Petrov to keep your deal with her. And Elara, watching from the car, her head throbbing, had picked up the phone. Dante? He'd answered. Don't kill him, she'd whispered, her voice a reedy rasp. He betrayed me, Elara. He almost got you killed. I know, she'd said, her project manager brain, even in its concussed state, seeing the process. And he's a resource. His sister is his leverage, and now we own that leverage. Killing him is an inefficiency. Saving his sister, saving him, that's a long-term investment. That's how you buy loyalty that a bullet can't. Reassign him. Don't be a hammer, Dante, be a ghost. And he had. They had funded his sister's cure, they had saved her life, and in doing so they had purchased Leo's body and soul. He was now their most valuable, most loyal, and most terrified asset, running their entire European operation from a clean, quiet office in Geneva, a ghost in his own right. As for Petrov, he was no longer a project. He was a non-performing asset. Dante had let him live, crippled, ruined, and trapped in a Russian prison so deep and dark the sun was a rumor. A dead man was a martyr. A broken man, as Elara had pointed out, was a message. Elara folded the ledger and handed it back to Dante. Good. He's efficient. He'd better be, Dante said, his voice flat. He pulled her flush against him, his hands sliding down her back, settling on the curve of her hips. Now. The meeting is over, Donna Costanzo, And we have a new project to discuss. Oh, she murmured, her arms sliding around his neck, her body melting into his. And what's the deliverable on this one? Dante's dark, possessive, and utterly adoring smile made her heart stop. A 5-year plan, he growled, that involves a lot less time in this boardroom and a lot more time on that red velvet bed. Elara barked out a laugh. God, no! I burned that tacky, ridiculous thing. Then we'll find a new one. He lifted her, seating her on the edge of the smooth, cool travertine table, her legs wrapping around his waist. We're meticulous, after all. And we don't, she whispered, her lips finding his. Like loose ends.